The point of this is to provide the best facts-driven show that we possibly can.
Ideally, you have a glue guy who is good.
Hashtag glue guy, hashtag locker room guy. You can't go sign Bobby Holik to $1 trillion. You can't do these things.
Very satisfying.
The absolute best NYR show in town.
This is the Liberty Blue Rangers Podcast. With Andrew Chelney and Nick Zararis.
Rangers fans, welcome to the best Rangers podcast in town. I am Andrew Chelney alongside Nick Zararis, and we are Liberty Blue. We scream about the Rangers so that you can save your voice and that you don't have to. That's how deeply we care about you, and we appreciate that you have joined us for the ride. This is episode 4, live on Twitch. We will put the full video up on our YouTube at Liberty Blue Pod. We are on Twitch right now, live at Liberty Blue Pod as well, and the audio version will be available as an audio podcast as well. Search Liberty Blue on your favorite podcast platform, and it should be there, and if it's not, DM us, tweet us, let us know. We will make sure that is there in the future. At Liberty Blue Pod on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Chelney Andrew, Chelney Andrew, and that is Nick Zararis with me. Nick, Zararis. These are our personal handles, so follow those as well. Nick, we got a big event in a couple of days. Can you remind me what that is?
Kevin Durant's going to get traded somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later, because my work has been bombarded with nothing but Kevin Durant fake trades and where could he go, and every single time it's now Vegas has Kevin Durant's odds as plus 300 to this place, and then it was plus 500 yesterday. Oh, what do they know? It's like we're almost to the event. We're almost to the place of tracking planes. How there's during the NHL trade deadline, a lot of some fans love tracking players and their planes and where they're flying to and what's going on. We're almost there with Kevin Durant. It's crazy.
I still remember when Kawhi landed in LA. What was that? Like 3 years ago when he signed with the Clippers, and they literally had the local news helicopter there on the tarmac when he landed on the PJ. So that is good for something. But of course, we're talking about the NHL draft, which is this Thursday and Friday. The draft is a little bit different this year because the Rangers are now in a position where they're not really worried about the draft as much as they have been the last couple of years, whereas they've been in a building period where you just need as much draft capital as possible, as many cracks at it as possible, in hopes of some of these picks becoming actual players or valuable assets that you can use to acquire players. Rangers don't have a first-round pick this year. They traded a conditional second-round pick to the Winnipeg Jets for Andrew Kopp. They made it to the conference finals, so that second-round pick upgrades to a first-round pick. So the Rangers, in terms of the draft here, they're going to be around most teams. This is that weird in between where it's kind of a staring contest where nobody really wants to set the market yet. The Kings kind of did in acquiring Kevin Fiala last week. We saw the Lightning salary dump Ryan McDonough to Nashville. So we're getting there, but it was a holiday weekend up in Canada. The insiders were very quick to let us know that by just retweeting trade announcements as opposed to saying a trade is about to happen. But it was a holiday weekend for a lot of the personnel in the league. So usually it doesn't really get going until the draft, the day before the draft. I think Seth Jones got traded the day of the draft last year. So that's kind of what we're all going to be sitting around and waiting. There's a lot of dominoes to fall here. There's a lot of conjecture and rumors and smoke screens and weird things going on. So we've got Johnny Goudreau, who's the biggest fish, Philip Forsberg, another, probably the second biggest unrestricted free agent. We have the rumors that Montreal, hosting the draft this year, wants to trade up and probably get another top 5 selection if they could to go with the first overall pick. We have the conjecture that the Flyers are willing to part with the 5th overall pick for a player that could improve their roster right now. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, and we're just in that weird in between where we have to wait to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, for the Rangers, it's kind of a different boat to what we've been in the last few years, where we're hogging all the picks and trying to pick a diamond in the rough in every single one of them. And the Rangers, even in the 7th round, everybody on Twitter is like screaming about take this guy, take him now. And it's like somebody that I personally have never even like. You could have told me that this was like an NHL creative player, and I'd be like, yeah, I believe you. Like some of these names, and I work in basketball, I work in NBA media, and I have 2 podcasts about the NHL, right? Like I don't have time to sit and watch the 3rd division of U18 in Sweden playing whoever. Like I don't have time for that. So like I'm relying on people that are smarter than me about the draft to be like, okay, I've heard of Shane Wright. What about him makes him so good? Clearly, everybody is projecting him to be 1st overall. And if the Montreal Canadiens do galaxy brain this, that could be a problem for the Rangers. And Nick, you brought this up before the show, and I'll let you talk about that here in a second. But like, right now for the Rangers, they don't have a 1st round pick, which could potentially be an issue. They as you mentioned, they traded that 1st round. Like it could have been a 2nd round pick, but because they made the conference finals, Winnipeg got that 1st round pick for them. It could have been used as trade bait, but now the Winnipeg Jets have it. That could be used as trade bait for Winnipeg. Now they can try to package that in for somebody and make another run. Who knows? But it's going to be an interesting couple of days.
The draft is weird because everybody has to talk themselves into something. Like as much as we like to think the guys you take in that top 5 are sure things, as Ranger fans can attest, there is no such thing as a sure thing in any sport, in anything, because talent development is not linear. Sure, I have known Shane Wright's name since I think 2018 when he was 15 years old, because they let him play up a year in the OHL. And they were like, yeah, this is going to be the next guy, the next Canadian born player who plays up an age bracket in junior and then is going to be one of the first 5 picks in a draft a few years from now. There is a little bit of conjecture. I know I was reading TSN's column yesterday that Bob Mackenzie still does, one of the few things he does because he's mostly retired now, but they did an anonymous survey of 10 scouts across the league, and they had Juraj Slafkovsky, I said it right this time, the guy who is from the Czech Republic, or Czechia, I think that's what it's called now. I forget what that is, but hockey, they changed the federation name. He was the first vote getter. He got the most first place votes of who you would take 1st overall. And that's a lot of recency bias because he just played in the World Championships, which are in early June. And he played in the Olympics this year because NHLers didn't go. His production isn't great for considering he should be kind of dominating in the league he plays in relative to his skill level. But those 2 really good tournaments have bolstered his bona fides recently. And, everybody likes the most recent thing. It's the same thing in the NFL. Trayvon Walker had a really good playoff game and national title game. It got him picked 1st overall. I would always opt for the safe. I say that in air quotes because there's no such thing as a safe guy, but I would take Shane Wright here. And if Montreal doesn't, that's going to be bad for the Rangers, because if the Devils take Shane Wright and they load him up on a line with Jack Hughes and Dawson Mercer, that could be very, very, very dangerous in an NHL that's kind of in a weird spot now, because the really good teams are now in a spot where we don't know who's coming back. Tampa Bay has a couple of restricted free agents they need to kind of figure out. Florida, a small army of free agents. Colorado, a small army of free agents. Vegas is still not cap compliant. They need to sort that out. So a lot of the big fish teams that everybody knew was going to be good going into last season, they all have a lot of decisions to make. So we got to see where things are going to shake out. And the draft is the starting point. We're going to find out. And then Johnny Goudreau, those are the 2 big things. Is Montreal going to get into the top 5 with a 2nd pick in the top 5? And is Johnny Goudreau going to stay in Calgary, or is he going to go somewhere else? Those are the 2 biggest things we got to wait to see.
So right now, if you take a look at the draft order, if the Canadiens kind of galaxy brain themselves out of Shane Wright here and the Devils take Shane Wright, that poses an issue for the Rangers, because now the Devils have a phenomenal talent, another phenomenal talent added to their team. And then if they do get Shane Wright, what I think they'll do is they're probably between 2 options. They will either overpay for somebody like Jack Campbell, who was pretty solid in net for Toronto for most of the season. He did have a dip. I think it was after the trade deadline. Yeah. But for the most part, he played pretty well. Or they could kind of roll the dice a little bit and trade for John Gibson out in Anaheim, who Could he be traded? The check marks are always kind of flip-flopping on this. There was a moment of time where he requested a trade, but then there were other reports that no, of course not. I want to stay in Anaheim forever and ever. Either way, I mean, John Gibson is a good goaltender. His last couple of seasons haven't been as great as we know John Gibson can be in net. The question is his health. He's had numerous health problems throughout the years, but a lot of that is due to the Anaheim Ducks continuing to play him every night, despite them not being very good, but he's being forced to play anyway for some reason. But that's a problem that the Devils might have to address, because if you overpay for a goalie like John Gibson, the Anaheim Ducks are going to want the key to the city return. And if John Gibson can't play a whole lot for you and you just traded everybody to get him, you're back at square one.
So let's unpack it a little bit. We know the Devils have Mackenzie Blackwood, who really good OHL amateur pedigree, really good developmental pedigree, was really good in the 56-game season up until he hurt his hip, and then they had to shut him down for the entire year. He never was fully healthy last year. He was playing with, I think it was a heel injury for most of the season, so he wasn't really able to effectively push off of one foot. The Devils ran through 7 goalies throughout the course of last season. Ideally, for the Devils, they're going to go out and get a 1B goalie to run in a tandem with Blackwood, excuse me. A lot of similar names in hockey.
Rangers legend, Colin Blackwell, baby.
The Leafs are going to bring him back for like a happy meal, and he's going to be very good on their fourth line this year. But back to the Devils, they are going to be in a weird spot where if you go out and get a premium goalie, if you go and spend a lot on Campbell, on Darcy Kemper, if you can convince Marc-Andre Fleury to come in, Blackwood is still young enough where if you delay him as the full-time starter by one season, that's not going to totally inhibit his ability to be a good goalie. But, you know, eventually you would like to get something out of him because he has shown you flashes of being a good goalie at the NHL level. You just got to put it together and you got to give him a chance. We know the Devils were pretty bad defensively last year. They scored a ton of goals, but they conceded more goals than they scored. And they ran through a small army of AHL goalies who had no business playing at the NHL level. So the Devils are going to be one of the very interesting teams to watch because they have the bones of a pretty good team. They don't need that much more to be relatively competitive because for as much as the NHL likes to pretend there's a lot of parity, I mean, the Ducks were in the hunt for a playoff spot till like 2 weeks to go in the season last year. It's not impossible to hang around as a mediocre team.
Yeah, and even if you take a look at these UFA lists, right? I would think the Wild are going to move on from Cam Talbot before they move on from Fleury. And I know that Fleury is a UFA. My understanding is that the Wild right now, and we saw it during the playoffs, that they just relied more on Fleury. They trusted Fleury more to handle pressure situations than Cam Talbot. So I would believe that they are going to try to move from Talbot and re-sign Fleury. I think the reason why Fleury hasn't been re-signed by them yet is because they are trying to move Talbot, and probably that happens at the draft. Like that's how they want to approach things. Whether that will actually happen, I mean, if teams don't want Cam Talbot, well, there's not a whole lot they can do about it. But some team out there is going to want Cam Talbot. It's just a matter of who it is. Maybe the Devils come calling. Who knows? Like Cam Talbot is angry. Cam Talbot wants to prove that he is better than riding pine on the bench and in pressure situations. And maybe that happens in New Jersey. Maybe he comes there and lights a fire under himself and provides the kind of solidified goalie work that the Devils have needed for since Brodeur retired. Basically, like they haven't had that stability, and maybe Cam Talbot will provide that for them. Who knows? But right now, with the draft in 2 days, I mean, there's the problem with the NHL is that everybody could get moved, but usually nobody gets moved at the draft, and it's just like, well, like what if this guy gets moved? What if that guy gets moved? And then the NHL is just like, well, we have a trade to announce. The 7th round draft pick will get moved for next year's 7th round draft pick. And that's the only trade of the day. Thank you very much. Have a good day. It's very boring.
Yeah, the NHL draft doesn't have the juice like the NBA and the NFL draft do. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about at the end, my parting shot for this episode. But just hockey's got to figure out that the key to growing the game is in the players. The reason the NBA, the reason the NFL are so vibrantly alive and so engaged with by their fans is there's constantly something happening because the players are in control. Hockey is the one of the hockey, football, and basketball. Hockey is the one where the GMs and the owners are still kind of in control of the league, and it's why the player salaries are so depreciated in comparison to the other leagues and things along those lines. But the last question I have for you before we transition to the Ranger-centric part of this episode, which of these dominoes to fall are you most interested in? DeBrincat, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Montreal trading back up, Goudreau. What moves the needle for you? What are you most interested in?
I think the Chicago Blackhawks as a whole are very intriguing because they have DeBrincat, who's probably going to get traded. I would think so. Maybe you have Jonathan Toews, who's making a Brinks truck of money, and at this stage of his career, and where the Chicago Blackhawks are, probably wouldn't make sense to keep him there for much longer. You have Patrick Kane has the same kind of issue where the Chicago Blackhawks are just not good enough to house Kane's contract, Toews' contract, and also whatever, multiple Brinks trucks that DeBrincat's going to get. Like these contracts, they're just going to overpower what is Chicago's already limited cap flexibility. So DeBrincat probably is going to get moved. I would think so. Probably maybe a 65-35 split because he's a phenomenal talent. Chicago knows this, right? They're gonna ask for the key to the city and 17 first-round picks and your firstborn child in order to trade Alex DeBrincat to you. But ultimately, they also understand hey, we clearly do not have the cap space to sign everybody and also put out a full team out there. So. They might trade DeBrincat, or they might do whatever they can to keep DeBrincat, and maybe even trade Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews instead. I mean, it probably won't be popular with Chicago, but that's definitely an option, I would think.
The Blackhawks are in that weird in-between because they fired their general manager last year. Their general manager thought they were a lot closer than they actually were. Everyone remembers how aggressive they were last year. They went out and got Marc-Andre Fleury. They got Seth Jones and said, okay, we're making the playoffs this year. And the wheels came off very quickly on that. The GM got fired for reasons other than team performance, but you get what I'm saying here. The coach got fired. Toews and Kane have both kind of been a little disgruntled, I think would be the word I would use to describe their how they feel about the situation there. They both have 1 year left on their contracts. Both probably could be really good rentals for somebody because by that time in the season, Chicago retains half of, so they both make the same amount. It's $10.5 million. So by the trade deadline, prorated, it would only be $5.25, and then Chicago could retain half of that. And you could talk me into one of those guys at $2.75 million for 2 months. That I think would make more sense for both of them as opposed to trading them right now, where that cap hit is kind of extraneous and there are not a lot of teams that can afford to take that on right now. It's the same reason we're going to have to wait and see with Goudreau, because all of the rumored teams that would make sense for Goudreau, none of them have the cap space. They would have to make a move before they added Johnny Goudreau. So that's part of this too. I think Goudreau is the most interesting one to me, just because he just came off of what in most years would be a Hart Trophy kind of season, 100 plus points. I think 35 goals, something along those lines, playing on the best first line in hockey. He's one of the best players to reach free agency in quite a long time, even if he doesn't go anywhere. And from what I understand, Calgary said they're not going to be outbid on him. So if he wants to go somewhere else, it's purely for personal reasons. So that's the most interesting one to me. Now, when we think
quickly about Chicago, they have right now $20 million in cap space, right? The intriguing thing about Chicago is that Kane's and Toews' contract is up at the end of next season. So realistically, there is a world, because DeBrincat is signed for one more year at 6.4. There is a world in which they re-sign everybody important and then kind of kick the can to next season, because you have to sign Kirby Dach, you have to sign Kubalik. I would imagine they'd sign Dylan Strome unless they trade him. I mean, I would think that they keep him, right? And they need to show up their defense. Like, they have, in essence, the cap space to do these things. but Patrick Kane's contract expires next season. So does Jonathan Taves. So they could, in theory, they could say, everybody just hold on for one more season and then you're going to get paid. Because right now we have a good amount of cap space, but we have to fill up a lot of these holes in order to field a hockey team. And there's a lot of money, and Tyler Johnson is getting paid $5 more million until the end of 2024. So he's got 2 more years at $5 million. Again, Chicago, teams love helping out Tampa Bay. Teams just love doing it. Ryan McDonough just got moved to Nashville for a McDonald's Happy Meal. And McDonough's still a serviceable player. Nashville is going to use him well. But again, teams just love giving Tampa Bay cap space year after year after year. It's phenomenal how that happens. They're paying Seth Jones $9.5 until the end of the world, essentially. And so they could, in theory, just kind of keep everything status quo for another year and say, we'll just revisit once Taves and Kane's contracts expire. That's a possibility.
So I was reading about this morning in The Athletic, and from what I understand, everybody other than Seth Jones is available in Chicago. They don't know what they want to do with Dylan Strome because they have been aggressively shopping him for the better part of 2 seasons now. They were healthy scratching him for portions of last season in hopes of facilitating a trade for him. They couldn't find anything for him. I don't know what his market value is because he's been a very streaky player and an inconsistent player and somebody who just really hasn't stuck at the NHL level as much as you would think for somebody who was drafted as highly as he was. Kubalik, they've been trying to trade as well. Realistically, from what I understand, they want to start over. They fundamentally basically want to start over. They want to get as many draft picks as possible and prolong this. And that's another part of this conversation is we were just talking about kicking the can down the road. That's the ultimate goal for an NHL GM. It's funny. I was at a wedding this weekend and somebody asked me, how come the same 6 coaches keep getting passed around for the same 30 jobs? And I go to him, it's just so the general manager can keep the job as long as possible. It's not about winning the cup. It's about making the playoffs every year. You know, David Poyle's been the general manager of the Nashville Predators for 25 years.
Since 97. He's been their only GM, if I remember correctly.
That's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
How many
here.
cups do the Predators have? I can't remember.
That's a donut.
I think they made 1 final.
Yes.
That's it.
1 final.
25 years, man. It's a long time to keep a general manager who has given you 0 cups and 1 final in 25 years.
Yeah. It's frustrating. It is very frustrating when you see the benefits of being aggressive and making these decisions, just trying. There are so many teams who eliminate themselves from the chance of winning a championship before the season even starts. There are 10 to 12 teams every single year that eliminate themselves from cup contention in August, in July, by saying, okay, this is the team we're going to dress for next season. And that whittles the field down. And that's unfair to those fan bases that coming into the season, you have absolutely no hope of winning.
Yeah, I just don't understand the idea of, I get it if you're a general manager, you just want to keep your job. Like everybody wants to keep their job. Nobody wants to get fired. But at a certain point, you kind of just have to take a step back and scope out what you've accomplished so far and what the future is for your organization. And for the Rangers, for example, right, like Chris Drury has set, okay, we're clearly in a window that's opening for us to achieve a Stanley Cup. So instead of kind of keeping things as is, he was aggressive at the trade deadline to get Andrew Kopp and Frank Vatrano and Justin Braun and all these pieces to try to go somewhere, and it got them to the conference finals. Like there's a lot of teams that either kind of stand pat when they're in between, or they're just holding out for one more playoff run. And if you're kind of in that no man's land of, I guess, well, back in the day when 1 through 8 made the playoffs, like if you were 9 through 12 and kind of like that no man's land of you're not good enough to go anywhere, but you're also not bad enough to lose a bunch of games, that is the worst place that you want to find yourself in, because then you're stuck in the mud and you can't get out of wherever you're at. You can't go back. You can't go forward. You have to decide, okay, either everybody's getting traded and we're getting 17 first-round picks, or we're trading every single asset that we have for this one run, and here we go. We'll try something. If you what the Predators have been doing with David Poile a lot of the times is we're there, we're competing, we're in the conversation, we're close to a playoff spot or barely in the playoff spot or what have you. And that's kind of been a lot of their years.
Existence,
like they were, especially when they made the cup final, like they were a good team, but for the vast majority of the Predators' existence, they've been okay, they've been good, but they have never really been a phenomenal hockey team because they keep being in that like middling ground of not bad, not great, we'll see what happens, and then David Poile just keeps his job for another year.
Okay. It's time to circle back to our belovedly torturous hockey team. The thing I keep telling everybody who asks me, how do I think the Rangers are going to do next year? I do not see a world in which the Rangers can possibly be as good as they were last year next season. And it's basic math. They need to replace 3 top 6 forwards, a 4th line left wing, and they have $11.5 million to do it. Oh, and they need a backup goalie. So even if we're going bottom of the barrel, backup goalie, $1.5 million, you're down to $10 million to fill out 3 top 6 roles. Okay, you want to slide Hedl up, you want to slide Kakko up, you want to move Lafreniere or Kreider to the right. Okay, top 6 settled. Okay, you need a whole 3rd line then. And that's just sheerly on probability and math. I don't see a world in which the team works as well as it did last year. And that's the assumption that everybody is as good as they were last year, which again, there are no guarantees in hockey. And filling out the rest of this lineup this summer is going to be a real difficult struggle, just a genuine struggle to fill out the roster because they went a lot further than they expected to last year. And it may have opened the window a little prematurely. They gave up a few assets and now they're kind of close to being one of those teams where we have too much high-end talent to just sit around and wait for our young guys to get better. But we don't have any money to go out and get one more high-end piece, which is realistically what they should do. In an ideal world, they go out and they get Dubois or Scheifele, and then they kick the can down the road for 2 years because you add one of those guys. Okay, then your second line center is a little more settled. You can skimp out a little bit on second line right wing because your center is that much better than the one you had last year. But the money's not there for that unless you do a 1-year thing. And then you have to revisit this problem next year. And then you're a little more, even more pronouncedly vulnerable to the rest of the league because you have to handle Lafreniere and K'Andre Miller. So there are so many spinning plates. You ever been to the circus? You see the guy who's spinning all the different plates. There are a lot of plates spinning in the air right now, and soon they're going to start falling. And the first thing we can touch on here is the New York Post report from last week that the Rangers and Tyler Mott are going to get something done, was the way Molly Walker made it sound, that it was relatively close. And I liked what Mott brought a lot to the team when he was in the lineup for, I think it was like 5 regular season games and then like 9 playoff games. He's a good 4th liner, good penalty killer. You can't pay a 4th line left wing $2.5-3 million. That's just that's untenable. That is just untenable in your roster construction, especially in a crunch like they're in right now.
Yeah, and I don't think they will. I think they know what they have in Tyler Mott, and I think Tyler Mott knows what he has in himself. And I don't, because they don't have the cap space to be giving out contracts like that. If you give Tyler Mott a $2 million deal, okay, well, Cap Friendly right now has the projected cap space for the Rangers at $10.2 million, right? So if you give Mott 2 of those, they are down to $8.2 million, and you have to sign a bunch of players, including people in your top 6, with that remaining money. They understand the cap situation, I would hope, because they're the New York Rangers and they have people in place that they pay a lot of money to figure these things out for. So I would think that they know this just as well as we do. But the one thing that I would say, like, we knew this even before puck drop last season, where they gave Ryan Reeves an extension before even seeing him play. He's earning $1.75 million this season, and they gave it to him last offseason. So he's 35 years old. He was healthy scratched for a vast majority of the playoffs when games actually mattered. He was nowhere to be found. Why? Because he's slow and isn't very good at hockey right now. Like, to give him an extension was not a good idea, but they're on the hook for that. Barclay Goudreau is making $3.65 million until the end of the universe, until the sun eats up the earth in a billion trillion years or whatever that happens. The Rangers will still be paying Barclay Goudreau this ridiculous contract. So these small-ish contracts that the Rangers that gave out last season are really starting to hurt them right now. And also, I mean, I know some people in the Rangers space are huge fans of him. I know Blue Shirts Breakaway are huge fans of this guy, but $8 million for Jacob Trouba until the end of 2026 is a lot of money for someone who is very inconsistent. There are times, we talked about this earlier in past episodes of the show, where Jacob Trouba, one game in the playoffs, was phenomenal. He was blocking every pass, every shot. He'd made all the right plays. He was great. And then the next 3 games, he'd be abysmal. He'd be nowhere to be found. He'd be out of position. He'd give up goals that shouldn't have happened with him on the ice. He's a strange hockey player. So I think he has a no move clause as well. So if he does get moved, if he does get moved, he's gonna have to sign off on that. And I don't know that he will, considering how much he wanted to come to New York initially. So that might just be a non-starter. But a lot of this money, and again, the Jacob Trouba contract was given to him before the pandemic. There was no, you couldn't. It's not on the Rangers per se that Jacob Trouba's contract is as big as it is, given the situation that we're in. No one knew that the pandemic was going to happen and that there was going to be a flat cap and all these things. Like, it was given out with the assumption that, hey, with this new ESPN deal, the cap is going to be 20% higher, 25% higher. There's going to be a lot more room for upgrades and movement, but obviously that didn't happen. So I can't really blame the Rangers for that. But you still gave out the money, so you have to deal with it.
I was going through today when I was doing show prep, and I was looking at the teams that have gone to the Cup final, gone to the conference final, and I want to say that I'm trying to think of how I would say it. The way the Rangers have constructed their roster does not make sense. So let me start here. All of the teams that have been consistently in the mix for a cup the last couple of years, you think about Colorado, Tampa, Vegas, we're going to put over here because they're a little bit different because they were an expansion team. They were very aggressive in their roster construction. Toronto, I'll say Florida. All of those teams, they're big ticket guys. Their most expensive roster players are guys they drafted and they were paying for restricted free agent years. The Matthews and Marner contracts, the Barkov and Huberdeau contracts, the Point and Kucherov contracts. They signed those contracts when guys were 23, 24 years old, paying for prime years of those players' NHL careers. So they end by the time they're 30, 31, at latest 32 years old, when you realize when the decline is more apparent. The longer you hang around, the more likely than not you are going to start to deteriorate the older you get. The Rangers' most expensive players, Adam Fox, okay, that is a guy you bail restricted free agent years. That makes sense. Panarin, you paid premium value. I think he's the 5th highest paid player in the entire league. You didn't develop him and you bought his ages 27 to 34. Okay, expensive, and you bought unrestricted free agent years as opposed to restricted free agent years. Jacob Trouba was 1 year away from unrestricted free agency. They traded for him when he was 26, going into his 27-year-old season. Okay, I understand the idea there. Zibanejad, you're paying for unrestricted free agent years. Chris Kreider, you're paying for unrestricted free agency years. The problem with doing that is you have no money to keep your own in-house high-end players. What happens if Lafreniere has a 65-point season next year and says, okay, I want a long-term extension now? What happens if K'Andre Miller has a top 8, 9 in the Norris voting season next year? What happens if Capo Caco signs a 1-year thing this year and we revisit this restricted free agency next year? Well, you have money tied up in Jacob Trouba and Barclay Goudreau and Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad. The whole point of tanking for 4 or 5 seasons and getting all of those first-round picks was those would be the guys who brought you to the promised land. Overpaying for guys to fill in the gaps while you were waiting for those guys to develop, That's not roster construction. You think about what Colorado's done. Colorado just won a cup because Nathan McKinnon makes $6.5 million a year because they paid ahead of time for him, knowing he was going to be very good. Their most expensive player this year, I think, was Cale Makar. Actually, no, Cale Makar's extension kicks in next year. Their most expensive player was Mikko Rantanen, $9.5 million. Panarin is making 11 and a quarter, 11 and a half, something like that. The way the Rangers have constructed their roster is they are expecting way too much of their high-end players who, let's be honest, aren't as good as some of the other teams in the league's best players. That's just the way it shakes out. I like Panarin a lot. He's not better than Kucherov. He might not be better than Braden Point. That's just the reality of it. And they are asking a lot from those guys who make a lot of money. And they haven't given the young guys a real opportunity to be depended on yet. And now that we've reached this kind of crossroads in the roster construction, do you really want to roll the dice on just promoting those three guys from the kid line, Hito, Kakko, and Lafreniere, to the top six? And that's you're playing those odds. I mean, one of them probably sticks, but betting on all three of them to stick and play at a high enough level to be a second, third round in the playoffs type team, you're playing long odds. And the ideal roster construction gives you as many cracks at it as you can. We've seen teams start to get squeezed out. You think about all the middle six forwards the Maple Leafs have had to trade away or lose over the years. The Lightning have consistently found ways to prolong their window and find cost-effective guys to fill specific roles. The Rangers kind of are in that in-between no man's land where they don't know what their young guys are yet, really. They have a few really high-end guys who are expensive and in some cases making more money than they are worth, even the ones who are very good. And now you got to fill in those blanks. And there isn't a obvious move to make here. And that's why I think I'm so nervous about this offseason. Like, if you just told me what they were going to do, I think I would be less nervous, even if it's bad. Like, if they talk themselves into something stupid, which I could very well see. I know I saw Sean Monahan discourse, which had me very worried.
I don't think they have the cap space for that. I don't think they're going to go for him, but I think it's a great point by you. Like, there's a way of going about building a true cup contending roster, and the Rangers right now are kind of in between of, like, we have a lot of super young guys that are talented, but we also have Panarin, who's 30. Zibanejad is 29, but he's signed for 8.5 until the end of time. You have Chris Kreider, who got signed to the extension. I think it was the trade deadline last season, but instead of trading 2 years ago, and instead of trading him away, you have him at $6.5 million until 2027, and he's 31 at this point. Again, 52 goal season, and he was great and all that. But again, if you watch the playoffs, who were the three most disappointing players at 5-on-5? It was Panarin, it was Zibanejad, and it was Chris Kreider, and that's a problem no matter how you look at it. A regular season, they were great. And at spurts, especially in the power play, those three were great during the playoffs and all that. But if you're getting paid this much money, you have to be good at all facets of the game. You can't just be good on the power play, because then you're just a bunch of Mike Hoffmans running around. Like, Mike Hoffman is phenomenal on the power play, but at 5-on-5, he's absolutely nowhere to be found. And that is the problem right now that the Rangers are facing, is that their top three guys in the playoffs were essentially a bunch of Mike Hoffmans who were lethal when it came to having the man advantage, and they could get all these fancy passes through and all these opportunities and all these things. But at 5-on-5, they were totally and utterly shut down. And when you're getting paid that much money, when a team has that much of their cap tied up for these three players who are supposedly the best on the roster, and you get outplayed by three kids who are making league minimum, I mean, what's like, the Rangers want better. Like, they should expect better out of those three. And it was disappointing to see how they played at even strength in the playoffs. And I don't imagine that suddenly, somehow, some way, if they make it the playoffs next season, that this problem will just magically go away.
Okay, Andrew, I went into the deep recesses of Evolving Wild and of Spotrac to try and find plug-and-play guys who would be able to fill in somewhere in the lineup, who are going to cost The most expensive one is a restricted free agent. They would have to give up something for, but the team already has made the league aware he's available. So the first guy, you mentioned him last week or 2 weeks ago, it might have been. Jesse Puljujarvi, who has shown the ability to be a top 6 winger, to be the thing I like about Puljujarvi, especially when I went through and was looking at his underlying numbers, especially his transition numbers, he's really good at carrying the puck into the zone, which is something Kreider and Zibanejad desperately need. And we know he has the ability to play with high-end players because he rode shotgun with McDavid and Draisaitl, and he's really good at parking his ass in front of the net, which I know Kreider does that, but it would be nice to have somebody else who does that and has a little bit of versatility where you could play him pretty much anywhere in your lineup and you wouldn't get hurt. You would probably have to give up a 2nd-round pick, which, again, if you're going for it, like the Rangers say they're going to be, that's fine. A 2nd-round pick, maybe 4 years from now, is something you could use. Jesse Puljujarvi can step into your lineup right now and play. Issue is money, again. So next tier down is where we start getting into guys who actually are kind of tangible. We mentioned him first episode because I've always been high on this guy, is Evan Rodriguez. He is an unrestricted free agent. Pittsburgh hasn't figured out what they're doing yet because they're waiting on Letang and Malkin. And it kind of sounds like Malkin is almost certainly leaving, which is a very weird thought. And no, I don't want Evgeny Malkin, even if he were to, because he wants at least 2 years and the Rangers can't do 2 years or more.
Yep.
If he wanted 1 year, okay. Paul Stoutsny, 1 year, okay. But
Sure.
Getting guys to take 1-year contracts is just, it's not realistic. You are not going to get somebody to do that unless they are truly at the end of the line and playing year to year, somebody like a Joe Thornton or a Patrick Marleau. You're just not going to get somebody in their mid-30s who can probably get that kind of contract from a bad team. So Evan Rodriguez had a crazy heater the first half of the season. He had something like 20 goals at the All-Star break, and he had never scored 20 goals before in his entire career. Somebody like that. And then we start getting into the really, like, the bottom 6 guys who won't be expensive and are just versatile. The guy I was pounding the table for last year, Johan Larson, who got traded to the Capitals at the deadline. Great defensive numbers. That is actually what a shutdown 4th-line center looks like. He will not be as expensive as Tyler Mott. And if you move Goudreau to wing, and yes, I know if they're paying him 3.6, he should probably be playing 4th-line center, but he's not that good on faceoffs anyway. So Johan Larson there. Even cheaper than that, Zach Aston Reese, who got salary dumped by Pittsburgh to Anaheim. And then this one's a little bit more out there. He's going to be a little bit more expensive, probably $2.5 million-ish. Andreas Athanasiou, who's one of the fastest players in the league and is kind of a head case and just needs a change of scenery. I mean, Detroit had him when he had, like, I think a 19-goal season as a 23-year-old and then traded him to LA for nothing, basically. So I've basically resigned myself that the Rangers are going to be bargain bin shopping this summer, barring something ridiculous like Monahan. I don't want any part of Mark Scheifele or Dubois, and Dubois only works if you can get Kreider or Trouba to waive their no move. And then you're still a step away again, because you're making one move to go forward and then you have to make a move backwards to fit the salary. So there are no easy moves right now.
Yeah. And in terms of Chris Kreider, he scored 52 goals last season, a career high, most of them again on the power play. And if you wanted to, if there was ever a time to sell high on somebody, you wouldn't find a better situation right now than the Rangers with Chris Kreider. If they wanted to find to maximize Chris Kreider's value to the moon, basically, I would imagine that they could find a multiple suitors that are willing to find that they're basically just willing to empty their pockets to get Chris Kreider, because again, the NHL loves nothing more than recency bias, and Chris Kreider, I promise you, will not score 52 goals next season. So if there is a world in which the Rangers go to Chris Kreider and say, hey, can you please waive your no move clause? There's a trade on the table, and for the betterment of the organization, we would love to get this done. That would be great. But with in terms of Puljujarvi, the Oilers don't want him anymore for
Whatever reason.
For some reason, I don't know. The Oilers making questionable decisions. Oh, where have we seen this before? But I would personally love Puljujarvi, but again, like, I don't know how good of a second line winger he could be right now. He's very good defensively, and that's something that the Rangers need as well. But a lot of times what was lacking in the playoffs was the ability for somebody to get the puck and put it in the back of the net. The Rangers did not have enough depth scoring against Tampa Bay to get it done. So can you trust Puljujarvi to step up to the second line and score you a goal when absolutely needed? Because that's the kind of money that you are going to be giving him if you give him an offer sheet and he accepts it and he becomes a Ranger. You give him that money with the expectation of, okay, he's going to come in and he's going to be a minute chewer. He's going to be a prime focal point of the offense, and he's going to be expected to score a lot of goals. Can he do that? I don't know. And a lot of these other names like Evan Rodriguez, I'll do bad things to get Evan Rodriguez on this team. I absolutely love his style of play. I like his attitude. I like the way that he can provide scoring at the exact perfect moment that teams need him to score for him. I mean, he wasn't he didn't have this scoring prowess in Buffalo, but he still had a good underlying metrics back then, and he's performed very well and above what he was earning in Pittsburgh. So again, I don't know what kind of money Rodriguez would want from teams. It's kind of he could ask for a Happy Meal and he could ask for a Lamborghini. There's kind of it kind of just depends on what his agent has to say and like what teams are willing to pay him. But Evan Rodriguez is a guy that I would absolutely love to have. I think he's a great middle six kind of player to have on your roster. I think he provides the offense that teams need. On the defense also, he's a great two-way player. Anthony Ciu, I don't really know much about his defensive style per se. To my recollection, he's not an incredible defender. So if he's just here to score goals and kind of nothing else, then by all means. But he's, to my recollection, I could be wrong. And hey, like no one goes 82. No one has gone 82-0 over the course of a season, right? Everybody loses. So if I'm wrong about Anthony Ciu, feel free to correct me. But that's the last time that I remember watching him and reading up on him. And for Johan Larson, I mean, he was great on a very bad Coyotes team. If you can do that on a bad team, I would love him as a fourth line center for the Rangers. Same thing as Zach Asterius. I mean, he's good depth, but the biggest question right now that I have is for Puljujarvi. I mean, if you're gonna give him an offer sheet and you're gonna slide him into that second line, can he perform at that level right now? And the answer is I don't know.
Well, Puljujarvi, Oilers are shopping his rights right now. He's a restricted free agent, and the Oilers, worst case, would tender him his qualifying offer so that if another team signed him, they would be entitled to compensation down the road. I forget how that's calculated exactly off the top of my head, but you would be trading a draft pick for him. It wouldn't be the offer sheet compensation. While you were talking, I pulled up Evolving Wild's contract calculator, which is pretty good. They are usually the best. They have Evan Rodriguez at $3 million flat, which I wouldn't be opposed to. That's a little pricey for a middle six winger, but for somebody with 15 goal upside, and the good thing about Rodriguez is he's great in transition, which the Rangers desperately need. He can kill penalties, and you can park him in front of the net on the second power play and actually do something with the second power play, as opposed to it being a 35-second of punting.
Well, here's my question to that then. Then if why did you sign Barclay Goudreau to that ridiculous contract of somebody that's cheaper than Goudreau and is also better than Goudreau available right now?
Because he won 2 Stanley Cups, being the third best player on a third line, Andrew. This is something I was explaining. The Rangers made all of the moves they made last season to be legitimate. They didn't become legitimate. They traded for Goudreau because we need somebody who's been there before. We traded for Sammy Blake because we need someone who's been there before. We traded for Ryan Reeves because we need somebody who's going to defend the guys who haven't been there before. Hockey is the only sport where narratives have an active part in roster construction. Nobody signs a gunner in football, a special teams gunner, because they went to 5 Super Bowls. If they did, Matthew Slater, who's might go to the Hall of Fame as a gunner, which would be very cool, of the Patriots, would have gotten signed by somebody there is so much of an emphasis on the intangible because it's unexplainable. And that's why NHL GMs love talking themselves into these kind of guys who have narratives about them, because they don't understand it, because they are looking for that extra edge. They're trying to get away with not having as much talent as other teams. So they need to look for intangible things to improve the guys they already have. That's something that's hard to come around to about understanding roster construction in hockey. And one of the things that's just so frustrating about it, they believe the fairy tales. It's great. Barclay Goudreau won 2 cups. He was the 3rd best player on his line. If the Rangers had overpaid for Yanni Gourde or Blake Coleman, okay, those guys can actually kind of play. They overpaid for Goudreau to block shots on the penalty kill, to wear an A on his sweater with 5 other guys, and to look pretty in the team calendar. There is no tangible reason, there is no legitimate reason hockey-wise that you should have given Goudreau $3.6 million when you can find a 4th-line center like Johan Larson for $1.5 million, or a middle 6 forward like Evan Rodriguez for even $3.5 million for somebody with 20 goal upside. That's pretty good. $20 million for $3.5 million. That's pretty good. Ideally.
Can you name me one thing that Goudreau does better than Evan Rodriguez?
Grow a beard. Goudreau does grow a decent beard. I'll give him that.
Sure.
I'll give him that. So one last thing on this topic before we start to wrap up, because we understand it's a holiday. People want to go get ready to listen to fireworks, or in some cases, console your poor dog while fireworks are going off.
Yeah, sure.
What would genuinely frustrate you if they did it this summer? Is there one particular player, one particular type of move? What do you not want the Rangers to do this summer?
Re-sign Ryan Strome. I think that would be the biggest problem I would have with this current team, because Ryan Strome, as we've seen over the course of the playoffs and even for stretches of the regular season as well, he is not a phenomenal 2nd-line center, even though his cap hit is going to reflect that and he's going to have the responsibilities of a 2nd-line center. He is not a 2nd-line center, and he put up all these points playing with Panarin, and that's, phenomenal and all that. But if you just watch him play and watch only him play, whether it be your eye test or analytics or whatever you wanted to use, I feel like you'd come to the same conclusion that Ryan Strome is not a top tier 2nd-line center, even though his contract will show this. If not the Rangers, somebody is going to overpay for Ryan Strome. So if it's the Rangers, we got a problem, because Ryan Strome didn't do much of anything over the course of the playoffs. And when the team needed him the most, he missed an empty net, as he always loves to do. So if the Rangers re-sign him, if they sign him to a cheap deal, I'm not opposed to that. Like there's a fine
what would qualify
line.
as cheap for you?
Yeah, I mean, like it's tough because
does it start with a 4? If you could get him for 4 something, would you do it?
I don't know if I would, man. Like I would probably stop at high 3s. Like,
he's getting that in his sleep. He made 4.5 last year.
Here's the thing. Then he's walking. Like that's how the Rangers have to approach this. Like, if he wants at least how much he made last season or more, he's gone. If he wants $4 million flat for a couple of seasons or however long, whatever, we can discuss that later. But like, there are worlds in which that can happen. But if he wants the same money or more than he's been making, and he's gone. And let's be honest with ourselves here. Of course, he wants more money than he made in his last contract. So this is a non-starter of like, oh, well, what if he wants less money? I mean, I guess if he really likes the organization and he wants to stay in New York, then he has to take less to stay here, because the Rangers have a lot of contracts that they need to deal with. And there's just no room to give Ryan Strome a big long-term contract. So if he wants to take less to stay here, then sure. Otherwise, he's out of here. And if the Rangers give him that big contract, then that to me would be the worst case scenario, because then that'd be the Rangers saying, okay, you're totally cool with how Ryan Strome played over the course of the entire postseason, which wasn't very good, but you're giving him more money to do the same thing again. And that would, to me, be the biggest red flag in all of this. Because, like, even trading for Dubois, even trading for Scheifele, like, those players, whatever you're giving up to get those players, they're still demonstrably better than Ryan Strome. So if you re-sign Ryan Strome to a good payday, that's my biggest problem, because trading for Dubois, trading for Scheifele, trading for these kinds of players, they're still upgrades. But if you bring back Ryan Strome just for more money, we got a problem.
Okay, so two things before we wrap up. Number one, I was writing something about this. It should go up at some point this week, and I was comparing just Dubois to Kopp and Strome. Dubois was the highest, then Kopp, then Strome. Strome was 84th percentile in goals above replacement. Kopp was 87th. Dubois was 90th percentile. So there is a marginal difference, and that type of marginal difference, the difference between a B- and a B+, especially somebody like Dubois, who's really good in transition, which is, again, I've said this like 6 times in this episode, the Rangers need to do a better job of having the puck, and controlling the puck in transition is a good way to do that. Number two, I got a question. Someone watching the show live DM'd me, Seamus, who good follower, one of my favorites. Live question. I hated Evan Rodriguez's guts in the playoffs so bad. I don't want him on the Rangers. Is that the exact type of reason I should want him on the Rangers?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. If you hate playing against a player, then that's a player that you absolutely want to have on your team. He was a pest. The Rangers players clearly did not like playing against him. And he did so many of the right things when he was on the ice. He scored like 15 goals against the Rangers in that series. I mean, he was great in transition. He was very responsible with the puck, without the puck. He's a player that when he's on the ice, you could feel safe when he's on the ice, because most of the time the puck is in the right hands, or at least not in the back of your own net when he's out there. So if you hated watching him destroy your team in the playoffs, yeah, that's definitely a guy that you want on your team.
We also gotta hook Evan Rodriguez up. He's the reason the Rangers won Game 5, because he took that really stupid penalty in the offensive zone, and then the Rangers went on the power play and eventually won that game. So we'll pay it forward. Evan Rodriguez, come to New York. We'd appreciate you. Unlike the Penguins.
Yeah, I mean, the Penguins right now, they don't know what they're gonna do, because they're like we mentioned earlier, they don't know what's going on with Letang, with Malkin. They don't have a ton of cap space, so if they bring those two back, well, then they have to make other cuts. Like Evan Rodriguez is probably not going to be in Pittsburgh again next season unless he takes a big haircut to make it happen. And if the Rangers I really hope the Rangers come calling on his door, because he'd be a phenomenal fit here.
He can play anywhere in the lineup and actually be good at playing anywhere in the lineup, unlike some of the other guys the Rangers have played up and down the lineup over the last couple of years. All right, Andrew, you said it in the outline, but real quick, you said your ideal move was finding a way to clear cap space. The big one you mentioned in the outline was being Trouba. I think that's the most obvious move to anybody who's watching. I think there's a very clear timeline that 2 years from now, if he is still here, he's either dramatically improved or the Rangers have named him captain. I think those are really the only two worlds in which he's still here 2 years from now. We saw it. I mean, Ryan McDonough waived his no move to go from Tampa to Nashville, and Nashville's not a bad place to live. Find out where Jacob Trouba would like to move, make it happen, ideally, but I just don't see a world in which it happens. I mean, the one world in which I could is, I think it was Arthur Staple wrote it in The Athletic a couple of weeks ago, that they were going to name Trouba captain before the season, and then somebody above Gallant said, no, don't do that. That is my only hope, that whoever that voice was realizes that they need to trade him a year from now when his no movement clause goes to I think it's 10-team no move clause.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, it's a dream, it's a pipe dream, right? It's I don't know if it's gonna. Obviously, we don't know if it's gonna happen, but the likelihood that Jacob Trouba is gonna get traded is not very high, let's say. But that's just kind of, if I was Chris Drury, that would kind of be my starting point to acquire more cap spaces. I mean, Adam Fox is clearly better than Jacob Trouba. Ryan Lindgren is more dependable than Jacob Trouba. Patrick Nemeth is, I would imagine, going to get dealt this offseason. I don't think that he stays on the team. And again, like, I know I mentioned this before in past episodes. I think, like, we have to not excuse Patrick Nemeth and his atrocious play, but we have to remember that multiple times, like this past season, he had to step away because of personal issues. So clearly, whatever was going on with him off the ice affected him on the ice. Like there, he was not all there. He was very obviously paying attention to other things. So Patrick Nemeth, I would imagine, is going to get traded, which clears up $2.5 million. But I would kind of just be cautious a little bit in terms of just outward, I don't want to say that we're going to be beating Patrick Nemeth, but like just outwardly, like let's cool it on being aggressive towards Patrick Nemeth, because very obviously there were things going on that were, that were distracting him from the overall objective when he was on the ice. With is K'Andre Miller better than Jacob Trouba? Yeah, I'm not afraid to say at this point. Even if you think that he's not there yet, he's gonna be. My guy's 22 years old, so he's gonna be. He's gonna also need a big payday after this season. So where are you gonna get that kind of money? You have to move somebody. And Justin Braun is a phenomenal sixth defenseman that I would love to bring back on a 1-year deal if he would like it. And Rangers have to figure out what they're going to do with Nils Lundqvist. I mean, my guy played and then was banished to the Shadow Realm and then was never heard from again. Like, I don't know what they plan with him. Is he going to get traded, or are they going to maybe slot him into the lineup next season? Who knows? With him and Braden Schneider, who was, I think, very dependable in the playoffs. He's 20 years old, my guy, and he kind of just stepped in and nothing really happened when he was on the ice, for better or for worse. Like, he take shots whenever he has the puck. Like, he's not afraid to shoot. Similarly to Jacob Trouba, who shoots it all the time, no matter what situation he's in. Like, my guy could be behind his own net and he's shooting the puck. Like, he loves shooting the puck. But with Jacob Trouba, my guy's making $8 million, and there's a lot of money that's gonna get thrown around real soon. And if I was Chris Drury and this is my pipe dream, then he's gonna get dealt.
Okay. Mine is finding a way to make that happen and using that cap space to get a second line center. What second line center? I'd be open to a conversation. I mean, the interesting one is if you try and buy low on one of the RFAs, whether you talk about Turcotte in LA, Doc, Josh Norris, if you buy low on a restricted free agent center and then do everything possible to make it work, I'd be in on that. Scheifele has kind of got a reputation of being an ass, and we know how bad things got in that Winnipeg locker room, that the coach quit in December of the season because of the personalities in that room. Their media day on breakup day back in May was one of the more like explosive things in hockey. I mean, if you have people talking about how people are more concerned with their individual stats as opposed to the result of the team, I think that's a clear-cut sign something wasn't working there. And we know Mark Scheifele's been hounded for not being good defensively for a while now. So I've used my context clues, and I myself am inferring that's who was being talked about. I don't particularly want him on the team. His cap hit is manageable, though. He only makes $6.1 million for next year and the year after. If you're willing to roll the dice on the personality matrix, I mean, for $6 million to play second line center and be a 70 to 90 point guy, especially with Panarin, I've heard worse ideas, but that's my ideal move for the summer, is finding somebody who can play second line center that can elevate Panarin and make Panarin better, as opposed to Panarin having to elevate him. That's my ideal move.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea. It's one of those things where if I would think that the Rangers, I don't want to say like they could fix Mark Scheifele or somebody like that, because you can't really fix a personality. Like no matter how much you want to believe it, I don't think there's a world in which the Rangers are like, we can fix him. We're gonna fix him. But hey, like, if you can deal with it and just throw him out on the ice and have somebody dependable that could score at will, then yeah, I mean, that would be great. And real quick here, let's wrap it up here. We got parting shots. I'll go first this time because I think you went first last time. And one of my parting shots is again at these NHL insiders, right? Like the Ryan McDonough, who is not a 13th forward. He's not a 9th defenseman. He's not some minor leaguer. This is Ryan McDonough. And the Tampa Bay Lightning official Twitter account tweeted the trade to Nashville before the insiders had any idea what was going on. They quote tweeted and retweeted the official account tweet instead of being on top of trades in the NHL. And like I said this on my Twitter at Chelney Andrew. It's like Woj and Shams would retire before something like that would happen. They will stop at nothing to get every single piece of intel that they could dig up, and like they know everything about everybody in the NBA. Meanwhile, Ryan McDonough gets traded, and the insiders are retweeting the official account. Hello? I mean, like, I understand. Like, somebody tweeted at me on my other podcast account, Shell Square, because I said the same thing on my other account as well. And they're like, well, you know, Elliot Friedman knew that the Lightning were trying to move Ryan McDonough, so you know, your point is moot. No, knowing that the Lightning want to trade Ryan McDonough and knowing that the trade is happening before the team announces it are not the same thing. They are two totally different things. We all know that the Rangers are going to move Alex Georgiev. Georgiev is not going to be in the Rangers next season. Am I an insider now? Like, no. The whole point of being an insider is knowing trades and moves and signings before the official teams put them on Twitter. Like, that's your job. Do your job, dude. Please.
You're very right. It is very frustrating as somebody who watches the other sports too. That's the thing. That's the thing. When you see it in comparison to the other sports, that's where it starts to get frustrating. Okay. For mine, I wrote down the title, Hockey's Inferiority Complex Needs to Stop. Every single time an NBA player, an NFL player signs a massive extension, there are the average to below average hockey players who are usually in sports media who have to say, what a league, they get paid to not play. I do not understand this mindset that these former players have of begrudging other people for maximizing their earning powers, especially when you think about all of the progress the NHL was making until they canceled an entire season because the owners realized how much power and money the players were earning. So that's my goal here. We need to stop with hockey players are tougher than everybody else. They play harder than everybody else. They make less money than everybody else. Worry about making the sport better for the players who are playing right now, as opposed to begrudging Zion Williamson for signing a Supermax extension, because every team in the NBA would have given him that contract. That's not just like an LOL Pelicans overpaying to keep someone. Zion Williamson had one of the, if not the best second seasons ever in the history of basketball, and then missed all of last season with a foot injury. If Connor McDavid, who broke his collarbone as a rookie and didn't win the Calder Trophy because of it, was eligible for an extension after that season, the Oilers would have lowballed him and given him a one-year deal to say, hey, he was hurt. We don't know what he's going to be, full well knowing he was on more than a point per game paces. The NHL needs to stop doing my sport is so much better than everybody else because our athletes are tougher than everybody else and they care more about the game. It's not just about the game. These are people. They have a unique and special skill. They should be earning as much money as they possibly can, and they are not right now because of people who are refusing to grow the game and allowing the players to be the ones who dictate the game. Ultimately, that is what would be best for hockey. The NBA soap opera is the most compelling of all of the sports soap opera. The NBA offseason is arguably more interesting than the NBA season. The NHL could do that. All we need is the players to realize that the owners are their enemy, as opposed to the other players who are making more money than them. That's my parting shot for you guys this week. I hope everybody had a safe 4th of July. Hope everybody has a good week, short week. That's always great when you can roll into the week on a Tuesday. We'll see you guys next week. We hope you guys enjoyed today's show.
Where can they find us?
I was getting there, Andrew.
Come on. You got the video version, you got the audio version, you got the social media. Where can they find us, Nick?
So you can find the shows. All the show's handle on everything except YouTube is Liberty Blue Pod. On YouTube, it is Liberty Blue Podcast. The show will be up there on YouTube. You want to talk about the fight I had with my computer to upload the show last week. I did not get the episode uploaded until 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, and we finished recording at 8 o'clock. That is how much my computer was fighting me getting this episode up, but it will be up on YouTube, hopefully sometime tonight on Monday night, if not Tuesday morning, available on all the major podcasting platforms in the audio version. The show's social handle is Liberty Blue Pod on everything, on Twitter, Instagram. I want to do TikTok things, but I also was reading they might take TikTok off of the App Store. So that might be something we address down the road. And you can follow our personals. I'm at Nick Zararis, Nick at Zararis. Andrew is Chelney, Chelney. Andrew on Twitter. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of things to tweet about this week in the hockey world, because those people we talked about before are going to get signed or traded, and the draft is going to be on Friday. Apparently, our old friend Pierre Maguire got called in as a ringer to work Sportsnet's draft coverage this year.
Well, he got fired after in Ottawa after only one season. So
yes,
it's a great hire, if I will say, by the Ottawa Senators. Oh, if only somebody knew that. Hey, maybe Pierre Maguire wasn't, a genius when it comes to hockey. If only somebody had any inkling as to the mind of Pierre Maguire. But hey, it's a mystery.
All right, that'll do it for this week. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good week.
Later.